Internet, and today's video is going to be another book opinion. Today's topic, Vassa in the Night by Sarah Porter. This book was a bunch of crap, and here are all the reasons why. Now, I don't want to be too harsh on this book. It did do some fairly good things, but I'm just going to say it was a disappointment. Now, if you've ever heard anything about this book, or if you've read it, you know it's very confusing most of the time. And here's my commentary as to why Sarah Porter fails to draw in her audience and where she could have done better. When I first heard about this book, I was extremely excited. One, it's beautiful, and you know how I feel about beautiful covers. And then I heard that it was also going to be based off of a Russian folktale. Now, I have just read the Grisha trilogy, and I love, just in general, when authors take their time to go to different cultures and different backgrounds and draw that in and bring it into their stories. The second thing that got me extremely excited was the fact that when I read the commentary on the back of the book, everything hinted towards a grim telling. And I love grim stories. I love grim fairy tales. While all the other little preteens were busy with their boy bands and tween magazines, I was busy reading the complete collection of grim fairy tales and writing them over and over religiously in a journal. That was my childhood. I lived for that. That was everything to me, and I constantly kept reading them. So I'm all for grim tellings. I want that dark fairy tale. I want some blood, some darkness in that. So I was so for this. I was so excited. And Sarah Porter let me down. Now, the thing about this book is that a lot of it is told in first person, and that's the thing that drew this book back. Sarah Porter is magnificent in the grim storytelling style, but there is a particular way in which it needs to be formatted, and she didn't follow the format, which made it really awkward. So, for example, grim fairy tales do not need explanation. They don't need to explain the world and how it is. They don't need to explain the magic and how it works. If someone turns into a swan, they simply do. There's no explanation as to whether or not this is weird for the character, whether or not this is awkward, whether or not they've ever seen witches before. There's never that conversation. There's never any clear and defined line between what is unnatural and what is natural, what is known and what is unknown. In a lot of stories, when it's told in first person, you have to make those distinctions clear. You have to make sure that you explain whether or not the magic going on in this world is normal for this world, or if it's abnormal, if only a few people know about it, or if everyone knows about it. And you have to make those lines very clear so you know who would act which way. Like if a character would freak out about something because they've never seen magic before in their life, or if a character would be rather nonchalant about it because, oh, this is just normal for them, weird stuff like this happens every day. With grim fairy tales, there's no reason to bring in that explanation. Things simply happen, and characters take it in stride. Whether or not it's normal for them or not, that doesn't matter. You don't have to explain the world and why those things happen. They simply do. Now, in first person, you can't do this because you're stuck inside a person's head. So stuck inside Vassa's head, you're very aware of the fact that nothing is being explained to you. You don't understand if this is normal for Vassa. Sometimes she says it is, but sometimes her reactions are different. Sometimes her reactions are nonchalant, but later she says it really freaked her out. Some things she gets freaked out about, and you're like, why are you freaking out about that? A bunch of weird stuff just happened. And other things she's like, oh yeah, that's perfectly normal, and you're like, wait, no, that's very strange. Why do you not care about this? There is no clear distinction. And because you're stuck in her head, you're very aware of that fact. You're very aware that the magical world and what is normal and what is not normal has not been explained. And while that is not necessary for grim storytelling, it is kind of necessary for first-person storytelling. You also aren't clear because while Vassa in herself has some character traits I'm not too fond of, the other characters around you don't give a clear explanation. So you have the magical creatures who you know are probably aware of these things, and then you have the human creatures. So then you have the humans. And the humans, some act like it's normal, right? They never question things that happen. And you're like, wait a second, that's super weird. But then on other things, all of a sudden they're freaked out. Like, how could this happen? It's not explained. It's never explained what counts as normal and what doesn't. Like, I know in some stories you can have a magical world and everything is la-di-da. Like, everything under the moon is acceptable. And in others, some things are acceptable, like elves and dwarves, but dragons are legends and impossible, right? But that's always made a clear distinction. With Grimm fairy tales, sure, you don't need that, but in first person you kind of do. And that's the drawback. Sarah Porter excels so much at this Grimm fashion of fairy telling that she forgets that first person has different needs. And it really, really disappointed me because she has interludes in this. Little things that tell you what's going on and like the backstory and stuff, right? All the interludes are in third person. And you just see the magic. You see that Grimm fairy tale come to life. And you're just like, I don't know why this weird stuff is happening, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when you tell it in third person because instead you're taking in the scenery instead of focusing on the details. Because the details for a Grimm tale don't matter, and third person doesn't bring that up and shove it in your face and isn't constantly making you question the world that you're supposed to be immersed in. So that was one big downfall. It was great. She was great at the Grimm fairy tale style of storytelling, but she chose first person, and I can't get behind that. Second main problem is I didn't like Vassa. I thought she was a very ignorant character. Now, I know there's parts of it, like, you can't expect your main character to know everything, but the problem with this is from the very first chapter, you know what's wrong with the world. They tell you. They straight up tell you, this is what's happening. You already get all these different informations, this backstory from the interlude. You're putting things together, like you're putting things together from the interludes. You're seeing what's happening in Vassa's life, and you're like putting stuff together. You're just making all these puzzle pieces together. Vassa still remains ignorant. She does not try to figure out anything herself. Instead, she blames everyone around her for not giving her the answers. And while they're constantly there telling her, hey, you have to figure this out yourself, we can't just spoon feed you everything, she sits there and complains and never figures anything out. And I think Porter saw this because towards the end, all of a sudden, she's getting like all these wild premonitions and figuring everything out. And I'm like, girl, for most of this book, I was looking at you and you be stupid the whole time. And I had to suffer through it. So, I just really did not like this girl. She was so annoying. Like, she was the worst person to be inside the head. And, like, none of her actions were consistent. None of them. Like, something would happen. Like, she shows up at the shop. You see something weird happen, and you're like, what? That just happened? And then she's like, no, whatever. Psh, whatever. And then someone's like, hey, you do that, something weird and bad's gonna happen. She's like, no, it won't. And then she does it, and she's like, why didn't you tell me? Freaking annoying. Got on my everlasting nerve. I struggled through this book. I probably should have given it up, but I don't know where to quit, and I am stubborn. This book is not worth it. I think for some of you, it might be if you don't analyze things like I do, if you can ignore problems and holes in the world, and when it's very pointed out to you in first person, then you might be able to enjoy this. But without a doubt, it's gonna come off as really confusing, because Vassa really makes it apparent that a lot of things haven't been explained about this world, and nothing ever really gets explained, because in a Grimm fairy tale you don't need to. The only thing that really helped me out with the fact that a lot of the story and the way that it was portrayed and the way that Vassa saw everything, so it was kind of a skewed view. The only thing that really helped me is that while I never studied Russian folklore like I have other folklores, I am familiar with certain concepts of it. So if certain characters that make their appearance in this book I had heard about before. So I was already piecing things together with the hints given to me by the interludes and what I had seen, and then my knowledge of Russian folklore in general. So it really cut down that confusion. But I don't think you should need to read the original fairy tale to love this book. You shouldn't have to. That's why they call it a retelling. you're retelling the story. I should be able to read this new telling of the story and fully understand the concept of what's going on. From this book, I still don't really understand what Vasilina the Beautiful, the fairy tale that this is supposed to be based on, what it's about. I'm still rather clueless. I have like a couple of hints where I think that original folklore might like entail what it might be about, but not really. I'm still confused, and I feel like this is too dependent on you reading the original so that you can understand this, or having some concept of what the original was and what the magic was in the original for you to really grasp what's going on. And that is another big fail. In a retelling, you shouldn't have to rely on the original to understand the current version. Like, I get part of it, sure, right? Take Alice in Wonderland's retelling. It helps if you've read the original when you read the retellings. But if it's a good retelling, with different characters in this world, a different portrayal, you should still be able to enjoy that book by itself and understand it, right? Without having to go and seek out other things so that you can understand it. Within a book, all the understandings you need for that book should be held in there. Everything you need to understand the world, the characters, should be in this book. You should not have to go everywhere else to search for it. It should be right there in black and white for you to read about so you can put these things together. And it's just not. And Vassa draws your attention to it, and you can't help but notice it, and I couldn't help but be frustrated. So that's my book opinion for Vassa in the Night by Sarah Porter. As you can probably tell, I did not enjoy the book. I was not a fan of it. I think some people could, and I'll try not to look down on you if you love this book, because I don't see it. I think it could have been so much better, and I think one of the biggest fixes that could have just made it at least 10 times better is if the whole story was told in third person. That would have been magnificent. It would have stopped the reader from drawing attention to all of the flaws of the world not being solidified. Sarah Porter is magnificent with her words. She is great. Like, I love the way that she weaved together the interludes. And if this whole book was just those interludes, man, I would have praised this book to no end. So don't get me wrong, there are very fantastic parts about it, but there are really soul-crushing parts that just, I wouldn't suggest wasting your money on this book. Like, it really kind of feels like that. I got enough out of it that I could enjoy it, but in the end, I feel like perhaps I would have been happier if I had just chosen another book to buy. Do I think I'm going to give this away? No. I think it's worthwhile to have on my shelf just so I can have something to complain about, and just so that I can study it more to see how you can tell a Grimm fairy tale the proper way and use that storytelling style in a way that's effective and doesn't defeat the purpose of it. So I am willing to keep this book. So it's good enough that I'm willing to keep it, but not good enough that I'm willing to recommend it on anyone else. So that's my book opinion for this video. If you like what you're seeing here and like hearing about my honest opinions about the things that I read, subscribe down below and become a member of this little joint party of listening to me spout off my ideas and claims and analyses of different books. And ring the little bell to be notified every time I put out a new video. That is all, so goodbye, Internet.